And we're obviously going to be button mashing. We don't need to read anything. Well, we're going to read a little bit. Till the end of the scene of whatever choice. Chapter 1. Low romance. And high corruption. Alright. It's time to button mash till we get to our choices. I said, nothing. It left me no chance to respond and scurried away. Yamazaki-san's eagerness to escape made it so he couldn't see me on the verge of speaking. Perhaps he had been purposefully avoiding a conversation with me. Did anything happen while the two of you were out? I wonder what Hijikata-san could have been referring to. I stared back at Hijikata-san with a dubious expression, which prompted him to continue speaking. Do you think that'd be okay? Understood. Thank you. I bowed at Hijikata-san, to which he responded with a flick of his hand, before rushing to the kitchen. It was unlike Yamazaki-san to flee so sheepishly, which led me to question if everything was okay. I decided to make him endure it. Yamazaki was eyeing the arteries in my neck longingly. In all honesty, it frightened me to the core. Being stared at like a morsel to a predator was enough for me to freeze in place. Someone who I deeply admired was suffering, but I could barely muster any courage to help him. I was so ashamed for letting my feelings dictate the matter, but Yamazaki-san curled his lips into a grin. There was an amiable quality to his apology, as if he were speaking to a young crying child. What had I been doing? I was so inspired by his words of reassurance that I broke into a sprint, hugging him from behind. Why had I let my fear take hold of me? All this time, Yamazaki-san had always been the first person to look after my well-being and protect me. I'm so sorry, Yamazaki-san. Please forgive me. I embraced his back, constricting him as tightly as I could just to remain close to him. Deep inside my heart, I hoped that my presence was enough to help ease Yamazaki-san's potent suffering. His pain had gone on just a little while longer. By morning, Yamazaki-san's onset had almost completely disappeared, and he regained his composure. That's to be Kofu, right? Never mind, I might be wrong. So we go with dot. How does this become a game over for us? Hijikata-san was prithee in delivering his orders, to which I could do nothing but fall silent. My position here was rather painfully reaffirmed. I had no place on the battlefield, nor had I developed any prowess as a swordsman. It would have been uncouth of me to ask simply because I desired to stay close to Yamazaki-san. My heart, so it seemed, couldn't be helped. Yamazaki-san's fingers gently tapped my shoulders before he spoke up. After that night, everything fell into place quickly. An influx of new recruits were being trained. Munitions, many of which I had never seen before, were being carted in and around the compounds. The Koryo Regulatory Company was hastily organizing its affairs, scrambling to prepare for the impending convoy to Kofu. When the day finally arrived, it was hard to believe. As I was neatly arranging my clothing for the trip to into a big bag, Sana-san stopped by my room to visit, sharing with me a surprise bit of news. What? Sana-san, what did you just say?
Yamazaki-kun は残ることになりました。紅葉鎮部隊には同行しません。土方君もこのことは承知しています。なんなら確認してもらっても構いませんよ。
Wait, I wasn't told about this. But why? Why would he change his mind all of a sudden?
どうしても何もないでしょう。彼は羅刹隊、新選組の影。新選組の表部隊に同行しようということ自体間違いなのですよ。
But just the other day.
雪村先輩、何をしているんですか？もう先発隊が動き出してるぞ。
我々や山崎君の分まで頑張ってきてくださいね。それでは失礼いたします。
Without another word, Sana-san skipped out of my room. I had been informed of Heisuke's orders to remain, but this had completely blindsided me.
おい、雪村先輩、俺たちも早く行かねえと置いてかれちまう。
I'll be going now. After the Koryo Regulatory Company's departure, terrifying rumors swept through Edo, detailing stories of brutal murders carried out in the dead of night. The victims, innocent townspeople, found with pale white skin and wounds on their necks. The thread connecting to each of the murders was the sighting of someone dressed in black, skin-tight ninja attire fleeing the scene. I never said goodbye, nor saw him since then. Well, that's one game over. Let's start the second game over. It's low romance, high corruption. So, instead he fixed his hateful glare upon the corpses of his enemies, warping his mouth into a menacing grin, which prompted me to say, "Handle the enemies!" Understood. Yamazaki-san was right. Unless the perimeter was safe, treating our wounded ally would do him no good. I gulped, realizing that I was in no position to dispute. Okay, but please, as soon as you're done fighting, I'm going to need your help treating him. Splotches of blood stuck to Yamazaki-san's pale face, and he spun around to continue fighting. My stomach looked queasy. Was any of this okay? As I watched him hack through the group of fleeing Imperial stragglers, he seemed distant, miles from me, despite being only a few feet away. I shook my head and shut my eyes, hoping the vision of a thoughtless murderer would leave me. Make him endure it.
言い返せないなら黙っていろ。
Yamazaki-san scowled devilishly before turning his back towards me. I seized the opportunity, lunging forward with my arms outstretched to hug his body tightly.
話せ。何のつもりだ。
No, I'm not letting go. If I had let him consume blood, then perhaps his humanity would have begun to wilt away. So I held on to him desperately, drawing him in closer to let him know that I supported him. It was a wholehearted sentiment. Although I knew that I would never experience the agony that plagued him, at least he knew that I cared. Wait. Okay, yeah, that's all the same. You are a human. Part of me wondered if I had any place to speak. More than anything else, I'd wanted to counter his depressing sentiment and say whatever came to mind. That's not true at all. You are a human.
この様を見た後でそういうのか。君は優しいな、雪村君。だが優しいな、残酷だ。
Yamazaki-san's mouth was agape, and his eyes stared at the ground, speechless. I decided to give him a moment to reprieve. In this moment, perhaps he had needed words of comfort.
話せ。
Here's change.
俺はまだ負けていない。寿命が尽きるというのなら、その前に貴様らを殺してみせる。
Yamazaki-san shoved me off of him, and it was clear that my concern was the furthest thing from his mind. I doubted that, if it were me standing opposite him with my kodachi unsheathed, he wouldn't give a second hesitation before rushing to kill me. Ugh. Yamazaki-san, why?
これが貴様らが頼った力の末路だ。間違っていると知りつつも戻れぬとは、新選組の末路を暗示しているようだ。もう構わんな、天城。
ええ。彼にとってはこれが唯一の救いとなるでしょうか。
No! It happened in the blink of an eye. Kazuma jerked his arm back and pierced his katana through Yamazaki-san's heart. Mouthfuls of blood began frothing from Yamazaki-san's lips. His shoulders folded inwards as he coughed. Yamazaki-san. All of the feeling in my body left. I couldn't grasp what was happening in front of me, so I crumpled to the floor on my knees in depression. In desperation, but also depression. I stared intently at Yamazaki-san, whose limp and lifeless body laid over a widening pool of his own blood.
雪村千鶴、お前には二つの道がある。一つは我々と共に来ること。我らはお前を腹からとして迎え入れ、決して無下にはせぬと誓おう。そしてもう一つは、この愚か者の仇を討つことだ。
Kazuma shifted his eyes leftwards at Amagiri, prompting his partner to nod in return. I stood still as Kazuma shot me a chilling glance, and spun around and began walking away from me.
お前がどちらを選ぼうと構わぬ。だが仇を討つなら、その時は容赦はしない。
Despite his thinly veiled threats, my mind was the furthest place from the ultimatum he described. I hadn't even considered running after them. The only thing swirling in my mind was the lucid color of Yamazaki-san's blood. The least I could do for him in this solemn moment was to pray for his soul, alone in the frigid darkness. I stood there, clasping my hands tightly, waiting until the frost took me with him. Well, time for game over number 3. Alright, we know this. Low romance and high corruption. Let's go. And we have to make him endure it. I could tell, judging by the way his face was warping, that Yamazaki-san's pain was only intensifying. Just as I attempted to contemplate my options. Out of reflex, Yamazaki-san began pounding his bare fist into a nearby building repeatedly. His knuckles split, bursting blood through broken skin. How terrible, I imagined. His suffering must have been for him to self-inflict pain as a form of distraction. Please, stop, Yamazaki-san! You're hurting yourself! After a minute of beating his hand senselessly into oblivion, I felt his muscles relax in my lap. Allies. Was that man a Shinsengumi warrior? As soon as the question left my mouth, Yamazaki-san formed a wry smile, and with his thin lips.
本人が聞いたら否定するだろうな。俺は大使なんかじゃないって。強いて言えば、そうだな。ある意味で今の君に似た立場だったよ。あいつ、伊吹と俺が出会ったのは君と出会うよりもさらに前。新選組がまだ老子組と呼ばれていた頃。言うことを聞きなよ、千鶴ちゃん。聞けるわけがないでしょう。
Yamazaki-san rose from the floor meekly, wobbling his limbs in a feeble attempt to support his own weight.
俺の役目は新選組の象徴である近藤局長を何としてでも守り抜くことですから。彼女を巻き込んでもそれは。
Stop worrying about me. Prepare to accept that risk, come what may. Actually, I made this decision ages ago. Whatever path Yamazaki-san chooses, no matter the circumstances, is going to be mine as well. Even if it means confronting death head on.
二人揃ってここまでバカだとは思わなかったな。何を言うかと思えば、バカなのは内田さんも一緒でしょう。刀を振るうこともやっとなのに、草が出るなどと。バカそのものです。相変わらず口が悪いね、山崎君は。
The scent of blood thickened the tense, humid air. Whoops. However, neither Okata nor Yamazaki-san seemed fazed. After trading insults, the two shared a playful grin. Considering how astute the current situation was, we had nothing to gain from tearing each other apart.
じゃあ、行こうか。二人とも。雪村君。 決して俺から離れないでくれ。
The The moment Ogata left, Fury swarmed us like flies to rancid meat. I unsheathed my Kodachi and braced myself. As the horde rushed in, I held my breath. Giving up wasn't an option, but hope was scant. There was a time for crying and a time for bravery. And that's how that ends. Our fate? Dead. More than likely, anyway. The bad ending. Not the unrequited love ending, because that one hurts like fuck. But the bad ending. Alright. Chapter 4. We are doing low romance, high corruption. He is no longer my father. You know, I realized something at Itabashi. The man I used to recognize as father is gone. His smile, his laugh, all of it had been forced. I think the man he used to be died a long time ago. That's why I'm determined to fight. I no longer see him as my father. Well, we'd better get moving. I think there's a lot for us to do before we hit the road. Is it the same? Yeah, it is the same. Make him endure it, yeah. Are you in pain?
いや、違うんだ。今は別に苦しいわけじゃない。
Yamazaki-san stood up in a frenzy, hastily pacing before he fled from the room. I suppose I spoke too soon. Yamazaki-san hadn't needed to consume my blood after all. I was curious as to why he was behaving so weirdly. Use them, is what we should say. My mind was flushed with stressful thoughts. More than anything, our emphasis needed to be upon ensuring victory in these drastic circumstances. Father cannot be allowed to succeed. Amagiri mentioned the Fury powers had no place in human conflict, but somehow they were an affront to him and our country. However, I find that to be more of a reason to use them, despite these desperate times called for desperate measures, and we'd be foolish to give ourselves a disadvantage.
ああ、できれば使いたくないな。敵は俺と同じ闇に落ちた存在なのだから。
Well, I got Father distracted. Take him out. I needed to draw all of the Furies' attention. Two Furies, their lips wet with drool, began slowly sauntering towards me, prompting me to step back. A raspy voice murmured behind me, and I turned around to face it out of reflex. It was... Countless red eyes shone through the darkness. 2, 4, 6, 8. Ah! I became intimidated, thrashing wildly with my short blade as a bevy of hands came out to grab me. My Kodachi, however, was snatched from my hands in an instant. Then, all of the Furies pounced on me. Their salivating mouths tore my bloody appendage apart as they sunk their teeth into my flesh without abandon. My arms and chest were forcefully pinned, and they restrained my legs to ensure I couldn't kick out. With their gritted teeth, I shook my head, shutting my eyes to refrain from witnessing their terrifying maws. I wanted to block everything from sight, as I knew that my fate had been decided. As much as I wanted to reject this reality, I couldn't. Escape was an impossibility. Suddenly, there was a pause. The creepy sensation of their tongues lapping my skin made my hair stand, flicking aimlessly for a drop of blood. In my heart, however, I held on to a bleak hope. Surely Yamazaki-san could still come and rescue me. I was certain of it. No matter how long I'd waited, however, Yamazaki-san's voice eluded me. Eventually, I stopped waiting. In fact, I stopped thinking at all. That is one hell of a bad ending, but let's do the unrequited love then, shall we? Chapter 4. Low romance and low corruption is your recipe for the unrequited love ending. Dun. For this one, it's he's no longer my father. Yes, he's no longer my father. Give him blood. The answer is use them. I'll be okay. Forget about me. You handle my father. I saw the glint of hesitation twinkling in Yamazaki-san's tender eyes as he saw the Furies closing in on me. Considering my lack of prowess in battle, I too knew that I couldn't keep the Furies at bay for long. But thankfully, it hadn't come to that. Yamazaki-san made his decision swiftly, racing towards me with a fervor in his wistful face. In an instant, crimson filled his eyes, and his hair became a stark shade of white. Unfortunately, the poison in his arms hadn't quite worn off, making his arm movements sluggish. Only through sheer force of will could he move. Yamazaki-san howled as he yanked the scalpel driven into his shoulder from his bleeding flesh. Then, I couldn't help but cover my mouth in shock. Yamazaki-san's eyes glowed ominously, and like a beast attacking its prey, he struck further in the larynx with the used scalpel. There was no need to verify if Father survived. As soon as Father's body hit the floor with a thud, Yamazaki-san leapt towards me, angrily hacking at the Furies beside me until they were a mess of limbs. As other Furies became privy to the scent of fresh blood, Yamazaki-san made short work of them, bouncing atop the hall's tables to sever their exposed heads. By the end of their skirmish, he was drenched in blood, slaughtering his enemies with aplomb. Yamazaki-san turned to look at me, battered and drained, and we quietly walked out of the castle. Our steps echoed in the halls of Shirakawa Castle, and as we made our exit, we were greeted with a large, incandescent ray of moonlight through the clouds. Yamazaki-san let out a calm sigh and walked towards a knoll in the castle's left, leaning his back against an old tree. Are you okay, Yamazaki-san?
正直に言えば疲れた。少し休ませてもらってもいいか。
Of course, the battle is over. I followed after him, tilting my head up towards the blank face of the moon. It was an engulfing light, warming without the heat, but soothing to the eyes. Moonlight wrapped us like a blanket, sheltering us from the atrocities we had just recently seen.
これで新選組に少しは 顔向けができただろうか。
Of course they did. You stopped my father, and now the Shinsengumi won't have to fight against Furies. All they have to do is beat forwards, continuing their fight so long as they still can.
そうか。よかった。決着がついたことを土方副長たちに報告しないとな。
His eyelids drooped slowly, and with his chin, he pointed towards a trail leading towards the forest.
おそらくこの先にそろそろ新選組の本体が到着する頃だ。今の経緯を伝えてきてくれないか。
Why don't you want to do it, Yamazaki-san?
悪いが俺はまだ動けそうもない。もう敵もいなくなったことだし、ここで休んで待っているよ。
Just wait here, and I'll make sure that they bring you some treatment, okay? Just take deep breaths. I nodded, standing up towards the direction that Yamazaki-san had pointed me. But I was fretful, unable to shake my despair. An unsettling chill brushed my cheeks from the mountain air, and I turned to glance at Yamazaki-san. I caught sight of a faint smile forming in the corner of his lips, illuminated by moonlight.
できれば振り返らず言ってほしかったんだが、君は本当に困った子だな。
Yamazaki-san? For some reason, his eyes went blank, a gesture of fragility that inspired fear inside of me. My chest tightened, feeling like a dull knife was being pressed against it. And as I took one step back towards him, he motioned me to stop.
どうかそのまま言ってくれ。君の記憶にある俺は最後まで笑顔でいてほしいんだ。
Once more, he meekly curled his lips into a grin. A gust of wind bit my soft cheeks. I stood there speechless, listening to the whistle of wind through the tall grass as I stared at Yamazaki.
さようなら、千鶴。
The traces of moonlight glowing in Yamazaki-san's wistful eyes faded, and so had the life inside of them. He was kissed by the moon, undiscorded by the hovering battle only hours beforehand. Yamazaki-san. Without realizing it, hot tears formed in the back of my eyelids, streaming down my face before being carried by the twilight winds. Then darkness. Overcast clouds gathered above us, casting a shadow over Yamazaki-san's resting body. Nothing else mattered to me. I waited idly, watching the time slip from my fingers as the wind settled.